So the question is, should you be editing your tracks before you mix or after you mix? And also, should you even bother miking up an amplifier when recording demos out of your home studio? Welcome to Viewer Questions Answered, episode 40. Now, before we dive into this excellent group of questions submitted by subscribers, I just want to let you know that we live in the absolute best time in human history to be a rock or metal recording engineer or producer. It all comes down to this simple fact that we have these amazing tools called MIDI drums and amp sims. The trouble is that so many of us make the exact same mistakes over and over and over again when using these tools, which ultimately leads to never-ending frustration within our home studios. And because of this, I've put together my simple and straightforward PDF guide called the MIDI Drums and Amp Sims Production Checklist. The checklist pinpoints and clearly lays out all of the issues that many of us make when using MIDI drums and amp sims, so you could avoid making these mistakes and get right to producing better results with the gear that you're currently using in the MIDI drums and amp sims that you're currently working with out of your home studio. The MIDI drums and amp sims production checklist is absolutely free right now, and you can have direct access by clicking the link below in this video's description. So without any further ado, let's jump into the questions. And our very first question comes from Tim. He asks, do you edit first or set levels first? Tim, this is a great question, and by far the most direct and clear answer that I can tell you is that you should always edit your tracks first. You want to make sure that the performance is locked in before you even think about mixing. A huge mistake that I used to make and that I see so many other people making is they try to mix tracks that are actually not mix ready yet, whether the performances weren't captured right or the performances are sloppy or need to be edited. So I always recommend editing your tracks and making sure that they're nice and pocketed and ready to be mixed before you actually mix or set levels. Because if not, you're gonna be chasing your tail and thinking you have a mix issue when you actually have a performance or editing issue. Hopefully that makes sense, and thank you for your excellent question. All right, our next question here comes from Mikey. My question to you is, what do you do if you're not happy with the mix, but your client is? Well, Mikey, this is a great question, and to be honest with you, a way that I kind of get around this is I make sure that I'm working with people that are going to be a good fit for my own artistic vision and for the sound that I naturally produce out of my studio. There have been a handful of times when I wasn't really happy with the mix, but the client was, and ultimately, as long as the client's happy, I'm happy. This is why I don't produce things like hip hop or other genres of music that I've found to not be interesting to produce for me personally. Although I like listening to multiple genres of music, for me, I really prefer to produce heavy, hard rock, or metal, and I make sure that the bands that I work with are on the same page as I am. And ultimately, you won't end up with this problem if you stick to that sort of mindset or mentality, at least in my experience. But again, to put it simply, for me, if my client's happy, for the most part, I'm happy. And if I were you, I wouldn't worry about it. Just make sure your client's happy. And in the future, just work with clients that are on the same page that you're on. Thank you so much for this excellent question. Okay, so this next question comes from Mark, and it's in reference to a video that I put out a little while ago on how to produce demos out of your home studio. I'll leave a link below in this video's description so you can check out that video. But his question is this: dude, this is perfect. I'm a musician and needed just this clear, concise info. Now to pick an interface and figure out how I want to do drums. I think I want to mic my guitar amp, 2 mics for the drums, go line in for bass, and mic in for vocals. Does this seem like a reasonable place to begin? Looking at a Volt 476 from Universal Audio. Now, Mike, in reference to the interface, I'm sure it is great if it's made by Universal Audio. In regards to your question about what you should be doing for your demos, here's my philosophy. I try to keep my demoing phase as streamlined, simple, efficient, and convenient as possible, because when I'm working with a band or working on my own music, I don't want to be thinking about equipment. This is because this is the songwriting and demoing phase and not the production phase. For me, if I had to mic an amplifier every time I sat down to do demos, it would really slow me down, and half the time I'd forget the idea that I had in my head, or maybe forget the idea that the guitar player had when I'm working with a band if we had to set up an amplifier. So for me, nice and simple, I just use a 2-channel interface, plug DI straight in, literally guitar plugged straight into the interface. I like to use amp sims and MIDI drums for pre-production so I can hear everything nice and clear, so I don't have to think about any equipment. And the same thing goes for microphones. I often just take an SM58, plug it straight into my 2-channel interface or whatever interface I have at the time, and I record the demo vocal when I'm working with a vocalist. Now, with that being said, if you're inspired by playing through your live amp and it really just helps your workflow and you find that you come up with better ideas when playing through an amp, by all means have at it. But for me personally, the less is more, and the more straightforward and simple my setup is, the better. So Mark, I hope this answers your question. And to anyone who wants to check out the video, again, there's a link below in this video's description, and I cover my demoing process in great detail and what you would need in order to record demos out of your home studio. Okay, our final question here comes from Kelly Powers, and it is a good one. Do you do volume automation before or after EQ and compression? Maybe do a video or point me to one you already have as to what order makes the most sense in the mixing phase, i.e. static mix, EQ, compress, time/space effects, automation, limiting, tape saturation, etc. Thanks for everything. Kelly. Okay, well, Kelly, the majority of my volume automation is post fader, so it's gonna be post effects as far as EQ and compression, or post insert effects. But because the volume automation and pan automation is happening on the track itself, it's generally gonna be pre-send effects. So reverbs and delays are gonna be happening after the fader. So any of my automation moves will affect the signal that's going to my ambient effects. In my opinion, it's important to do your volume automation post compression if you're doing a lot of compression, because remember, if you apply your volume automation before the compressor, it's going to affect the amount of compression that's being applied to the source sound, or how hard you're driving the compressor. So for example, let's say you really like the sound of the compression on your snare drum, and all you want to do is just make your snare drum a little quieter for the verse and a little louder for the chorus. I recommend doing your volume automation post fader, so that way it does not change the sound of the compression and the EQ and all the good stuff that you have going on your track fader in the inserts. Now, yes, there are instances where you might want to affect the signal that's going to your insert effects. A good example of this is your master bus or your 2-bus. A lot of times I like to automate my master fader to kick harder on choruses or just bring out certain elements of the music. And when I automate my master bus, it's happening pre-effects or pre-inserts. So in other words, the volume automation that's happening on my master bus is affecting what's happening with the compression on my master bus. But in general, there's way less compression for me on my master bus than there might be, for example, on a snare drum or vocal track or something like a bass guitar or something like that. So Kelly, hopefully this points you in the right direction, and let me know how that works out for you. So I would just like to shout out and thank everyone for submitting this excellent group of questions. And if you send me a question and I haven't gotten to it yet, just be patient. I will definitely get to it within one of these videos in this series. And also, again, if you're struggling with your MIDI drums and amp sims and want to get better results without having to buy any new plugins, you could have direct access to my MIDI drums and amp sims production checklist for absolutely free right now. There's a link below to the free guide in this video's description. If you found this video helpful, like, comment, subscribe, and share. And do not forget to click the little bell icon so you can be notified every time I upload weekly videos on all things metal and rock production. Until next time, happy mixing.